going on, everyone? It's Tim here with the TMA Connection. It's a local podcast that is focusing on people's lives, the community, and every once in a while we talk about real estate too, and we're kind of throwing all three together. I'm going to jump right into this, a very brief introduction, because we got so much to offer you today when it comes to estate planning, wills, trusts. Kind of a morbid subject. A lot of people don't like to talk about it, but it's so important because a statistic that Diana here gave me was 84% of people do not have any kind of plan for when they leave this earth.
That's right, 84.
So, wow. Diana is a real estate agent. She's also a real estate attorney. In fact, she owns 7 businesses and gave a great presentation at Direct Mortgage Loans a couple weeks ago. Graciously came in to do the podcast today. So everybody, this is Diana Kahn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is gonna be so much value. In fact, I usually ask at the end, but I'm gonna ask right now that if you find value in this podcast, please share it because there's just so much important information that's gonna be covered today, and it's going to it's really gonna make you think, but hopefully more than think, you need to take action. And when I say you need to take action, I need to take action too. So
I'm secretly here, guys, because I'm trying to get him to be my client. That's all I'm doing.
That's right. Yeah. Usually we don't invite real estate agents into the podcast, but you're the second one that I've had, so it must be pretty daggum important. So
right. There you go.
So before we get started, let's give everybody a little bit of a background about who you are.
Sure. So my name is Diana Kahn. You kind of covered it. I'm a real estate attorney. I'm also an estate planning attorney, which means just everything that has to do with estate planning. I've changed that term now because I think when people hear estate planning, they're thinking, I'm old and I'm going to die. So I've changed it. I now say that it's vision planning, right? Oh. It's vision planning and wealth planning for not only yourself while you're alive, because estate planning does cover things when you're alive, but it's also the generational wealth planning for those that you're trying to leave better off with your existence.
Okay.
So outside of real estate law, I have a title company, I own 3 real estate brokerages, and I also have a contracting company. So I just don't sleep, and it's fine.
I'm going to say, and on top of that, you're also a mom?
I am. Yep. Wow. 3 kids. I have a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old now. I think last time I saw you, he was 3.
Okay.
And a 1-year-old who is a diva. It's great.
God bless you. I have a diva in my family. I'm just not going to tell you which one it is.
Oh,
I got 3 girls, 3 beautiful girls, 3 awesome girls. So
they're all divas, though.
Depends on the day. So anyway, so we're really going to break it down. We're going to be talking a little bit about death, but we're also going to be talking about financial planning. We're talking about just the things that are. A lot of people have questions about this stuff, but. And we put out a post on Facebook yesterday, and I've gotten so many messages. I had some ladies come up to me in the gym today before coming in that know me, for doing this. So hopefully we can just provide so much value for people. But let's get down to the very fundamental basics. Why is estate planning so important?
So it's important for multiple reasons. Let's talk about people, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about people in general. If you have kids under the age of 18 and you just, I don't know, you leave your office today and something, God forbid, happens. You don't die, but you end up in a hospital. And, now you're leaving your spouse with your kids who is supposed to take care of them, but you don't have a directive on what you would want medically. Or maybe you just don't have a digital archive of your life. So maybe you're the primary breadwinner, maybe you pay bills and you haven't taken care of your estate planning. You're now leaving your kids while you're still alive with basically no guidance for your spouse. Yeah. Let's say that you and your spouse end up in a car accident and you have kids and you're like me and you don't want your brother to take care of your kids after you die.
No offense.
No offense. Yeah. I love you. But you die without a will, right? Yeah. Now your kids are going to the closest kin. So in my case, it's actually my mom, but my mom's a little crazy. Love you too. Yeah. So the next person after that is my brother. And instead of talking about my wishes or taking care of my kids, I'm basically not doing my due diligence. For those of you in business, right? Like you're building a wealth. You're an entrepreneur and you're talking about, let me do my life planning goals for 2024. But you're doing a disservice because you're not talking about your tax ramifications. You're not talking about worst case outcome. What happens if I get sued? If I get sued, and I have an LLC, I'm covered. And that's such a false belief. Yes, an LLC is supposed to cover you, but only if you do it right.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I sue people for a living.
Right.
Just like 84% of people don't have wills and trusts, like 80% of them don't have their LLC set up right. So having an estate plan is also looking at your vision for your business. It's talking about how do I protect my personal assets and separate them from a business. So the idea of estate planning is just outdated, right? It's really that vision plan. It's a vision plan of who you are. Are you a real estate agent? You know, if you're a real estate agent, you probably have rental properties. You probably are like, yeah, let me get that really nice house in OC and like do Airbnb. What happens if your tenant gets hurt? Who is that property under? All those things kind of come into play, right? It's commingles with the business aspect and formations and just knowing what you're going to want to do.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's so important to protect yourself with those kinds of things. So, so let's go wills and trusts. There's a difference. There are, but there are also, there's differences. There's similarities.
Yeah.
What is a will? What is a trust? Why are they important?
Sure.
Let's go into that.
So, and the first thing I'm going to tell you for anybody walking away from this is, I think when we were growing up, I'm not going to say my age, but when we were growing up, people said, if you have a trust, you're a trust fund baby. You have a lot of money. It's for rich people. And that is such a misconception, right? Anybody listening, you should have a will. I don't care if you're 18, right? I don't care if you're 45. I don't care if you're 65, because ultimately a will helps you determine and protect your stuff, right? When you pass away, your family, your loved ones, whoever is around you is going to have to take care of your stuff, right? And stuff is economic. It could be your money in your bank account. It could be your stuff as such as the equity in your house, but it could also be your dog. It could also be your cat. It could be your kids. It could be all of your stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's there. And a will says, what do you want to do with your stuff? What
Right.
happens after you die? You just basically write it on a piece of paper and you say, when I pass away, my stuff will go to X person. And then you give guidance, right? Like it will go to X person, but another person will manage my stuff. So if you have a child under 18, you can name who's going to be responsible, even if your kid inherits the things that you own.
Okay.
So a will is essentially a written paper that says, hey, when I pass away, this is my intention of who gets my things, so that we don't allow a judge to make that decision. And if your child's under 18, that's where that goes as well. Hey, I don't want a judge to decide the best outcome for my child. I'd like to make that decision.
Gotcha.
So a will allow you to say, these are my things, and this is who gets them. So with that being said, before you talk,
No,
you have a question.
I was just going to ask, like,
Yeah.
are there times when wills, it doesn't matter what the will says, or what makes a will enforceable versus unenforceable?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So in Maryland, you have to be above the age of 18 to write a will. You have to have the capacity to write a will. So think like dementia, anything like that. And then the ultimate one is it has to be in writing. You have to have 2 witnesses, and you have to have it notarized. Believe it or not, I have a case right now where we had a will.
Okay.
It was notarized. Didn't have 2 witnesses.
Wow.
So if you didn't have it properly done in Maryland, one of the brothers, he did estate court, which I'll talk a little bit about, but he got named as the personal representative to handle his mom's stuff. The other brother got mad and said this will isn't valid. And now the family's all fighting because the will wasn't fully done accurately in the state that they live in, which is crazy, but it happens. And I always tell people, when you have family, grief is funny. You don't think you're going to fight over money. You don't think you're going to fight about, your mom's, I don't know, vase that she kept flowers in. But grief is funny. And when your stuff is not properly taken care of, like a will, you're letting your family deal with their grief also while dealing with your stuff. So when you have a will, I think this is kind of the other segue that I always talk about is the idea is if I have a will, right, and I died today, my husband gets all my stuff. That's what the will says.
Okay.
And in order to understand why trusts are important, you have to understand what happens after you pass away. So all of your stuff, the example I always use is picture everything you own, whether or not it's, your car, the vase, whatever.
Sure.
It's just in an envelope and it just follows you around. So when you pass away, you've essentially said, in my will, we're going to take this envelope and we're going to let it X have it, whoever X is. But the state of Maryland says, wait a second, you have debt, right? You have credit cards, you have a bunch of debt. God forbid something happened to you right before you passed away and you needed like hospice care or a nursing home, which gets very expensive.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to pay that off. So you go through a process called probate, which essentially we just go to the court and we say, hey, my mom left all her stuff to me. And let's assess everything she's worth.
Okay.
And as long as it's not more than like 1.5 million, you can get it. You don't have to pay taxes on it. You're not going to get it right away because now we have to assess her debt.
Okay.
And you have about 3 months minimum to 12 months before you can actually get her stuff. And in that time frame, you have to give the debt holders notice. My mom passed away. Please let me know how much she owes. It's just like an administrative process, right?
Okay.
After you finish that, essentially what's left over after the debt is paid off is yours. But in that time frame, you're assessing like, do we need to sell the house for the debt? Do we need to do all of this? And that's that probate process. If you die without a will, it gets a little bit more complicated. The reason being is because you're still going through probate, but who gets your stuff is left up to the county, it's left up to the judge, and statute.
Okay. So then another layer to protect and be able to decide what happens is a trust?
Yep.
Okay.
So let's talk about that envelope, right?
Okay.
I think I broke it down as you take your envelope to the court, and then after a while, your family gets to keep what's ever left in that envelope. A trust is the idea that you, while you are alive, are giving or putting ownership into a new envelope. So your envelope is now empty. All of your stuff at the time that you are alive is assigned to something or someone else, and that's called a trust.
Okay.
So we empty out your envelope, we put all your stuff in another envelope, and we call that envelope, I don't know, the podcast trust. Let's just go with that. I like that.
There you go.
So now the podcast trust owns it. But what's very powerful about it is because you're saying, I no longer own it, you say, this new envelope owns it, this new trust owns it. And I'm assigning ownership. It means that while I'm alive, I get to fully use my stuff. I get control of this envelope. I get to do everything with this envelope that I want. Mm-hmm. But the moment I die, this envelope is also owned by this other person.
Okay.
So essentially you're using as a vehicle to replace the ownership at time that you're alive. So what happens is when you die, ownership doesn't change. The envelope is still there. We no longer have to go to probate at all because all of your wishes have been sort of placed ahead of time and you've already switched ownership prior to death. So the probate process is completely invalidated. Maybe your family has to go through probate just because, we have to logistically still have a will and all that stuff, but your envelope is empty. So those debt holders that are like, hey, pay me back.
There's no way of them
No.
piercing the trust.
Correct.
Wow.
So, another thing people always tell me is like, well, I don't have stuff. And I'm like, you absolutely do. Mm-hmm. You buy a house right now, you die a year from now, you have more equity in your house than when you bought it. Mm-hmm. If you have a bike, if you have stuff,
Yeah.
right? The other, I think, powerful thing about two other things that are powerful about trust is in a will, I say, my child gets my stuff. Period. The end. You cannot put any restrictions on that. Mm-hmm. In a trust, you can say my child gets my stuff. But if my child's under 18, my brother's going to handle putting the stuff in a stock.
Okay.
And he's going to make sure that the caretaker for my kid gets X monthly money, but 20% of it is going to stay in that trust till they're 35 and they finish college. Uh-huh. Or, they are married. You can essentially put parameters within the trust on when people get your stuff. You have more control. You can say something crazy like, you can sell my house and my kid can get the proceeds, but the cat has to live there till she passes away, which I've done before. It's crazy, but it happens.
Right.
Right. So for those of you still with me, I just spoke a lot, but essentially the way you should think about it is I leave my stuff to you in a will, and then we're going to allow everybody with the debt that I have to take it first. In a trust, not only do I leave my stuff to you, I leave it with explicit instructions to protect that wealth for the future.
Right.
But because I give it to you now during my time that I'm alive, I'm now avoiding inheritance tax. I'm now avoiding the probate process.
Okay, interesting.
So that's the nitty gritty of it. There's a lot of different types of trusts. There's a lot of other benefits. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. But a trust essentially is a vehicle for asset protection. It's a vehicle to allow you to make changes in your life. It's a vehicle to protect your kids.
Yeah.
I attended another event that was talking about, your legacy. And one thing I read was what they shared is that when it comes to wills, if you die with a will, your first generation will retain about 80% of your wealth.
Okay.
By the time you hit the third generation, only 2% of your wealth is still available. With a trust, that third generation is at 40%.
Wow. Wow.
So it's huge because what you're thinking about really is, I have 3 kids. I know who my kids are. I know who my kids are. It's not a bad statement. It's not a good statement. It's just, even at a young age, I can tell you who my kids are and how impulsive they can be, right?
Yeah.
As a parent, we have to make hard decisions for them while we're alive. But what if you had the control to say, this is the child that should handle my medical decisions, right? Because they're a little bit more level-headed.
Right.
Or maybe they won't take it as hard if I pass away with a bad decision, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or, this kid's a little bit more impulsive, or this kid probably will need a little bit more help if I pass away and I'm not here. So I'm going to put a little bit tighter restrictions on the money.
Okay.
They might hate you when you pass away because, they want the $5 billion that you left the other siblings. But those restrictions are in place because you know who your kids are. And
Right.
you're allowed to sort of help them transition into adults if you're not here for that.
Yeah. So would you say it's a will or a trust, or it's will and a trust?
So it's both, right? So when you pass away, everybody who's listening to this should have a will at a bare minimum. And
Okay.
there's, you should have a will regardless. Do that solid for everybody around you. If you have a trust, we also create you a will. And the reason we do that is because if I create the trust today and then you don't die for 10 years,
Okay.
let's say, the trust will say everything that's in the trust's name. And you will fund the trust, meaning that when you finish everything, you'll start going into your bank accounts and making sure that, like, hey, we're going to switch the name from my personal name to the trust name. But people make mistakes. Things get overlooked. So let's say you pass away and there's things in your personal name. The purpose of a will, when you have a trust, is to pour over into the will. So the will literally says, I'm now dead. My wishes were to put everything in my trust. If by accident I forgot to put something in that trust,
It goes in the trust.
it goes in the trust.
Right.
That's all you're doing. So
Yeah.
that when they file it, right, like when you go to probate, if you accidentally forgot to include something in the trust, the will literally says he doesn't own it. I didn't own it. The trust did. So you're essentially, again, creating sort of what's called a magic wand. It's the magic wand availability to kind of switch it back into the trust even at a later time.
Yeah.
So it's an extra protection, if you will.
So Kathy on Facebook
Yeah.
asked a question about how soon should you put your kids on the house if maybe the parents are getting up there in age.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing what you're talking about with trusts. What general advice, and we don't know specifics, but
Right.
as a generic answer, how would you go about answering that question?
I would put the house in a trust because the trust allows you to say who owns it, right? So if the house is owned by a trust, the kids own it, you own it, everybody owns it, and death is sort of irrelevant because we've already given ownership to sort of everybody at a different time frame. It's like essentially a timeline. If you don't do a trust and you put the kids on the deed, that's a double-edged sword, right? For multiple reasons, right? Like in the state of Maryland, if you quit claim deed, which is essentially you take the ownership of the house and you just remove yourself and you give it to somebody else. If you give it to immediate family, like your kids or your brother or anybody in the immediate family, in most counties, there's zero consideration, meaning it's not taxed.
Okay.
So I have people who are elderly and they're like, I'm just going to put the house in my kid's name
Yeah.
to protect it. That's all fine and great. But now your kids can sell it and you're still alive. And maybe you want to die in there. You don't want to go to hospice. You want to be able to stay home. You're giving away that right. And, everybody has different family dynamics. So that's a very hard question to answer. It's also sort of hard on a capital gains perspective.
That's what I was going to ask too. Yeah, because
Yeah.
you were talking about the taxes.
Yeah.
You know, being taxed on income and stuff like that. But it doesn't happen when it's in a trust.
Correct. Yeah. So you still, if it's an investment property, there's still capital gains that have to be paid, but there's sort of two great little loopholes in trusts. You have one particular trust that's called irrevocable. Once you make it, you can't change it. That's
Okay.
more ironclad than you will than a regular living trust that most people have. So in that trust, you pay consideration when you put the house into the trust.
Okay.
Consideration is essentially the taxed amount of the tax assessed value. So make this easier for those of you who are like, what? House is worth $10 today, and I put it in an irrevocable trust. I will pay taxes on the $10, and it's usually 1% to 2%. We pay taxes. We put in the trust name. Let's say it's 5 years from now, you pass away. Your kids are now the trustees. They own the house, and they want to sell it. The house is now worth $1.3 million.
Okay.
In a normal transaction, if it's not in a trust, they would pay taxes on $1.3 million. They would
Yes.
pay capital gains. With an irrevocable trust, they're paying capital gains on the $10, the time that when you put it into the trust.
Okay.
So it saves an invaluable amount of money
Yeah.
for tax purposes.
Gotcha.
And then it, again, allows you to do things like, we always hear, I don't want to go to a Medicare home, right? Like, I don't want to do Medicaid. Almost every nursing home accepts Medicaid. So that's a false perception. And listen, nobody wants to end up there. I don't want to end up there.
Sure.
But I also want my kids to have something when I pass away. So a trust will allow you to say things like, I want to age at home unless the wealth that I've built is now under a threshold. Like, let's say we use up 30% of my wealth for me to stay home, and now the upkeep is actually breaking into that wealth, then I'd like to be removed from the house. Those are things that you could do with a trust, but you can't do with a will.
Okay. Wow. So let's go into that question then. I like that. Families that are facing with family members that are going into nursing homes and stuff like that with payment, they evaluate your assets. When those assets are in a trust, are they able to still evaluate the amount of assets that person has in that trust and hold that against them?
That's a great question, and the answer is they look back 5 years.
Okay.
So if you're planning, right, you should put your stuff in a trust, because when you get to that age, you want to say, I've been in a trust for 5 years, and then it's not touchable. So on paper, your assets are zero. So you qualify for those government benefits.
Okay.
But it's a 5-year mark, right? So if you're like 75 and you have a cancer diagnosis, it's not too late, but it's just not as advantageous.
Okay.
So those of you in like your 30s and your 20s, those are things you should consider, because you don't want to get to like 65 and then be like, oh, I'd like to protect my assets, because you don't know what will happen. Create that trust ahead of time
Yeah.
and protect that.
I just think we live by, like, we don't think we're ever going to die.
Right.
And we could very well walk out of this office today and get hit by a bus.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but that's what it is, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I write trusts and wills for a living. Like, that's what I do. I didn't have my stuff figured out until last year. And why? Like, I don't know what the answer is. I literally have it at my disposal, but it's the ideas of, like, having young kids and thinking about some of these outcomes.
Yeah.
There's that. Some people just get overwhelmed with it. I've had people in my office who I'll ask them questions like, well, do you want to be buried or cremated? And she starts hyperventilating because she can't think about it.
Yeah.
But you're doing a disservice to your family not having those conversations. It's a disservice. It really is, because then you're allowing other people who love you to not only grieve you or have to take care of you, but also make decisions for you that are really hard to make.
Yeah.
Let's talk about advanced directives for a second, just to segue into that.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great.
So advanced directives are essentially what happens if you're terminal for whatever reason. You're brain dead. 2 physicians have said nothing has happened. So in Maryland, if you have your wishes, you can say, I'd like to receive nutrition. I'd like to get medicine. I'd like my life extended, or you know what, I'm brain dead. I just want to be kept comfortable. Those are all decisions that you can make for yourself.
Okay.
If you don't make those decisions, your family is making those decisions.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're setting up a situation where if you don't take care of this document, which, by the way, trust can be a little pricey because of the qualifiable benefits and just the intricacies. But a will, advance directive, a power of attorney, there's like 3-4 documents that everybody should have.
Yes.
Most attorneys don't charge a lot for them.
Okay.
So, not doing it is really just, when you think about it in hindsight, is like, okay, you're doing a disservice, right? And I'm going to segue and talk about my mom. I think that's what got you last time.
I think you have to. You definitely, you all need to listen to this story and put yourself in the shoes of Diana.
Yeah. Okay. So
this is crazy. Go
so
ahead.
last year, January 4th,
Okay.
my daughter was born, and I was postpartum, and my mom had booked a trip to Cancun in the height of COVID, which genius idea.
Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, exactly. 2020. That's funny.
Yeah, right.
She had a trip to Cancun and decided to go. Now, my mom is 70. She's a little bit, she's a little bit overweight, but otherwise very healthy. The only issue that she had is she'd had varicose vein surgery a couple years ago and had some issues with it, but it was nothing that we were worried about. So she flies to Cancun. She's there for a week. It's all exclusive. I have like a 3-week-old baby. My mom and I's relationship is whatever it is. So I'm like sitting there resenting her that she's not here, like, breastfeeding with me and whatever she needs to be doing. So my husband goes and picks her up from the airport, and he texts me and goes, something's wrong. And I was like, what do you mean something is wrong? It's like, well, she doesn't look right. There's something going on. You need to come take a look at her. And I was like, well, I can't. I have a newborn, right? Like, she probably has COVID.
Right.
So, I remember she came back on a Saturday night. Sunday morning was my other son's birthday party. So I texted her, and I was like, I don't think you should come. Think you have COVID. She's like, you're right. I have a fever of 104. I was like, go get a COVID test. She goes and gets a COVID test. It's negative. So, she's like, my leg is hurting a little bit. And I was like, do you think that maybe you got on a plane? Do you think maybe, like, we always hear about, like, you don't wear socks on a plane. She was like, I don't know. And I was like, all right, well, let's see where you are on Monday. Monday, she is very sick. I'm talking like she went from, like, maybe it's COVID to, I think she needs to go to hospital.
Wow.
And my mom is a very stubborn person. So my mom is a doctor. For those of you who are doctors listening to this, y'all need to stop being so stubborn with medicine. Like,
just like the estate planner that doesn't have their estate done until about a year ago.
Exactly, right. But this story is why I have it done.
Right, exactly.
So to make it very long, short, by Tuesday evening, she was still not going to the hospital. She got antibiotics called in by a doctor. That wasn't making a difference. So Wednesday morning, we decided, if you're not feeling any better, you're going to the doctor. My dad texted me Wednesday morning. He's like, so good news, bad news. Your mom says she feels okay. I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, what's the bad news? He's like, well, I came downstairs this morning, and I think she's been on the floor for like 13 hours. She says her leg, she tripped and she fell. So can you have your husband come help her off the floor? And I was like, are you insane? I called 911. Right? 911 gets there, and I'm on FaceTime, and he was like, well, she's refusing care. My mom was like, I'm fine. I don't want to go. And does anybody have an advance directive, a health proxy? We didn't. So the EMT was like, we can't take her. I was like, what do you mean you can't take her? She's on the floor. She can't, like, get up. They're like, so they help her off the floor. They put her on a couch, and they leave. 6 hours later, she's back on the floor. And when I tell you she was not there, I mean, I'm telling you, she was able to have a conversation, but my mother was dead. Like, I asked her, like, what's going on? And, like, there was just nobody home.
Right.
So we called 911 again, and EMTs get there, and my mom is refusing care again. But she's showing dementia-like symptoms, a woman who does not have dementia.
Right.
So we're on FaceTime, me, a lawyer, my brother, who's a surgeon, his wife, who's also a surgeon, and my husband, right? And we're like, look, she's not okay. Just interview her. She's, they're like, we think she's in sepsis. Like, he's like, we can't take her against her will. So I got quiet on the phone. I was like, I'm her power of attorney. EMT is straight up looking at me on the FaceTime call, and he knows I'm lying. And I'm just looking at him. I'm like, I'm her power of attorney. Yeah. He's like, do you have the documents? I was like, her entire family is on this phone call. I do not have the documents on me, but if you don't take her, she's going to die.
Yeah.
So they took her to the hospital. Ends up, when she was in the ICU, She had no documents, no ability to care for herself, and she was refusing all sorts of care. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. She wasn't right. So thank God for that ICU nurse at that hospital. She allowed my mom to sign a power of attorney there, which would not be held up as valid, by the way.
Okay. Right.
But
because you have to be of sound mind.
right. And like, I
Yeah.
knew this.
Yeah.
I knew this. And I had her sign it, and the nurse like witnessed it because otherwise she would have passed away. Got her transferred to shock trauma. Ends up she was in multiple organ failure, septic shock. I get a phone call. Now it's Sunday, right? So we started on Wednesday. It's Sunday. It's Super Bowl Sunday. I got a newborn there.
Yeah.
And they're like, so your mom just got the shock trauma. And I was like, okay. And my mom is wailing in the background. Like, she's not making sense. And they're like, we have to take her into surgery right now. She has necrotizing fasciitis, which is a skin, like a infection of skin eating disorder. And hers has traveled all the way up her leg. And we have to remove all of it or she's going to die. And I was like, oh, okay. And they're like, so we need to go now. And I was like, okay, what do you want? Okay. So she goes, so here's the thing. Your mom's entire leg is impacted. It's black. We have to either amputate her leg or let her die. They're like, we will try to save the leg and we'll try to take care of it, but this is a very extensive case. So what would you like to do? I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, do you want to amputate her leg if we had to choose or let her die? And I'm telling you, I had 2 minutes to make this decision. It's not like the movies where like a doctor comes in and you can like go, no, it was 2 minutes. So I was like,
And let's remember, you're postpartum.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, it was literally 3 weeks postpartum, maybe 4. So I got quiet and I said, go ahead and amputate her leg. And I hung up and I called my brother and I said, if mom survives this, she will never speak to me again. I said, if they amputate her leg, she will never forgive us. And I said, because I know my mother.
Yeah.
I know my mother, right? Like, she would never want her leg amputated, ever. And I, as a daughter, could not grant those wishes for her. Like, there was no way in hell that with a postpartum baby, with like everything else, I was going to be like, yeah, go ahead and let my mom die, you know?
Yeah.
Now, it was sort of like she'd never qualify for prosthetics. She'd be, you know, addicted to opioids and all this stuff. And, you know, the phone call happened at 6. I didn't get another phone call until 11:45. And it was the entire time, I didn't know what to pray for. I was like, do I pray that, like, everything goes well, right? That's obviously the one, but that's not what you're thinking about. You're like, do I pray that her leg is amputated? Do I pray that it doesn't work out and she passes away? Like, what do I pray for? Because I didn't know. So, for those of you listening, everybody's like quiet, like, what happened to your mom? What happened to your mom?
Yeah.
This is where I'm going to say, I'm going to hold off for a second to tell you what happened, to tell you that think about that situation, right? If you were me, I'm 100% sure you would say the exact same thing. But think about it from my mom's perspective. I know my mom and what she would have wanted, but she never documented any of it. So it's essentially, I'm grieving, I'm postpartum, I'm anxious. We're at the height of COVID, by the way. There's like also like a formula shortage.
Oh, gosh.
So there's like all these things, right? And I'm sitting there like, okay, so if you're my mom and you know all this, right? And you wake up without a leg. It's such a horrid moment. And what you're doing by not having your affairs in order is letting those who love you not only grieve, but also question those decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's when I went and got my stuff done because I was like, I'm never living through this again.
Not going to put my kids through what I just had to go
right.
through.
My mom did survive,
Yes.
and she definitely kept her leg.
Oh my gosh. That's I heard the story 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm still like on the edge of my seat.
She was in the ICU for 6 months. And let me just tell you, I have made this inappropriate joke, and every time I tell somebody this story, because she beat every single odd. Like, it's not like a magic story. Like, I tell people that I'm pretty sure nobody upstairs or downstairs was ready for her, and that's like factual. Because if this was most human beings, I don't think they would have been able to survive what she did. Funnily enough, I've had this conversation with her, and I asked her, if you were me, you know, what would you have done? And she said, let me die. And she straight up looked at me and she said, if this was me and I had woken up without a leg, I would have probably killed myself. She's like, it's just, I can't predict what I would have done.
Yeah.
That's not it's not okay. She's got medical degrees. She's a little bit of a narcissist. Like, she knows herself, right?
Yeah, sure.
So even in advanced directives for Maryland, there's a question at the end that says you have to pick one of two options. And option number one is, I know I can't predict everything in the future, but all of my wishes here are to be followed expressly, meaning that, like, you can't change them. Mm-hmm. Then option number two is, these are my wishes, but I'll let somebody else decide if, like, there's facts that change. So everybody who comes to me to do advanced directives, they're like, well, which would you choose? And I was like, the first option.
Yeah.
I was like, 100%. I was like, don't leave any doubt. Don't leave it to anybody else. It is not about the person doing the advanced directive. I think that's a false perception, right? Like, people say, like, oh, well, I'm going to be dead. I don't care. And I'm like, yeah, you don't care. Those around you care. Do that favor to other people. Do it for your kids. Do it for your spouse. Do it for your next door neighbor. You know, like, there's thousands of people who love you who are going to show up at your gravesite and say how great you were, how funny you were. But doing this and not having everything figured out is a disservice.
Sure.
So,
My goodness. Can I get a drink real quick? Jeez.
obviously, yes.
Well, man, I tell you what, that was a lot. Let's bring it back a little bit.
Yep.
Let's talk
Less emotions.
Less emotions. You own 7 businesses. You're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Talking to a business owner. What are some of the, what's the most important things that people should be seeking out who own businesses?
So you should always have a plan for when you pass away, especially if you have business partners, right? But if you have your stuff in a trust, there's more control even to that aspect, right? So let's talk LLCs for a second to talk about why trusts are better, right? I own a contracting company, and we pay people to go take care of stuff in the house. So Baltimore City, I had a painter out there one day. He called me. He's like, it's gonna be $30 for whatever I did. Not a big number. And I was like, okay, do you take cash? And he's like, no, I only take Cash App. And I'm like, well, I don't have Cash App. And he's like, well, you can do a check, like whatever. He wanted to get paid. So my husband, who has Cash App, paid him.
Okay.
But Cash App is tied with her personal bank account. So just like that, just that one instance, unintentionally, what we just did is we commingled our funds for business versus personal.
Okay.
So when you think about that as a business owner, I'm sure people listening are like, yeah, I've done that. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal if you cover it right. But what a trust does is it protects you that if you do get sued for your LLC or your S Corp or your C Corp, right? You always hear there's a veil, I can't get sued. It's very easy to pierce it.
Okay.
It's very easy to pierce that LLC as a business owner. It just is. I know people think like, no, that's not true. No, there's ways you could prevent that. And I'm happy to have those conversations on another podcast.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you that we pierce it all the time. We sue people for an LLC. And the first thing I do is, let's say your LLC, right?
Yep.
Whatever.
We do have an LLC.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's just call it the Penn LLC to make it easy.
Okay.
So let's say somebody wants to sue you. As a lawyer, the first thing I do is I look up the LLC. And then I see that you're the resident agent. And I look at the charter and I see you're also the owner. So I look you up. And as an attorney, I have an ability to do what's called an asset verification. So I put your name in and I do an asset verification. Let's say I see that you have 3 houses. And I can see the houses you own, what your mortgage amount is, and I can also see the cars that you own. So just by talking to somebody who wants to sue your LLC, within 15 minutes, I can see how much your personal assets are worth. As an attorney, let me tell you that piercing that corporate veil when you have equity in your home looks a lot more interesting. So what I do is I sue the LLC, and then I'm like, give me your books. And then I start working on trying to pierce that corporate veil. And unfortunately, for smaller businesses, it's much easier to do. It's, the less people you have in your LLC, we're sloppy, whatever. So the issue then becomes is you don't have a trust. All your stuff is in an LLC. I pierce that corporate veil. I'm now going after all your personal stuff. Now, if you had your stuff in a trust and then we pierce that corporate veil, again, your envelope is empty.
It's empty.
Right. But you can also put your business in a trust as well. So you can create a double layer of protection, which some people do. And people are like, well, does it really protect you? Absolutely. Let me tell you, as an attorney, when we go to law school, we're like, yeah, man, I want to do like nonprofit. I want to help. That doesn't pay. It just doesn't pay. Like, I would love to help a lot, and I do. And, my companies are all like people over profits, but we have to have profits to make that happen, right? So as a law firm, we do look at assets. We do look at what's worth a case and what's not. When we do a consult and I do asset verification, I'm going to look. And if you have a trust and you have an LLC and then all your stuff is kind of like set up tight, I'm going to look at it twice and be like, what are the chances I can break all that? And how good is this case? You might still get sued, but the case better be a lot better than just I fell and tripped, because I'm looking at all the amount of things that I have to pierce, right?
Yeah.
Because trusts are private. Unlike wills are public, meaning that they can't, like, you have, when you die, everybody sees your will. They see what you're worth and all that. Trusts are private. For a court to, like, make you hand over your trust to make it part of the public record, it's a much higher threshold.
Okay.
So as an attorney, I'm like, yeah, that's not worth it, man. Like,
right.
I understand you fell in that house, but, like, your damages are $10,000. This person does have insurance, but we got to go through the LLC. We got to go through the trust where the person who owns it actually gets that outcome. So it doesn't prevent lawsuits, just makes it harder.
A lot more challenging to go up against.
And sometimes harder is good. And if you have a business, there's tax benefits to have it in a trust. And if you do have a business and you want a personal trust and put your LLC into it, it's a business expense. So call me before December 31st and just tax write-off.
Yeah.
My CPA people are probably like, get her off the mic.
So let's say somebody, one of your friends calls you tomorrow. Unfortunately, close relative to them, whether it's a husband, wife, mom, dad, whatever, they pass away. There's no will. There's no trust. They didn't listen to this podcast that we produce, and it was just timing. It was off.
Right.
What are the things that they're going to have to do in this situation to kind of get the ball rolling with dealing? Because look, let's face it. This isn't taught in high school,
right?
You can Google things. It depends on what you read and stuff like that. But what are the things that this person's going to have to do to take over that situation?
So I'm going to get to the legal side of dying without a will, but first I'm going to talk about just the immediate effect of losing somebody, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about my mom, right? I didn't lose her, but she's a primary caretaker for my dad, who was 10 years older than my mom, 81. He had no idea how the bills are paid. He had no idea where the Social Security was coming in, their Medicare, their Medicaid. And she was sick. She was in the ICU for 6 months. Yeah. So yes, I was postpartum and I had to make this decision, but that was the start. That was not the end, right? Yeah. So imagine somebody dies without any of their intentions put down. If you're like me, in that situation, I had to get my mom's laptop and I had to like guess her passwords and I had to figure out where all her stuff was and I had to figure out like, how do I log into things? How do I keep their lights on? Yeah. And if you don't have a power of attorney, you don't have a will, you don't have anything, your family is now grieving you and also trying to figure all this stuff out. Then let's talk about burial, right? Like my friend just lost her mom, about 6 months ago, and her mom died very unexpectedly, heart attack, 3 a.m. in the morning. And she's my age, and she called me and she said, I didn't get to fully grieve my mom till about 6 weeks after she passed away. And she's like, and it's because my mom died in one hospital and then they transferred her to another. So the first 24 hours after I figured out she died, I had to figure out where her body was. And then it's things like you have to figure out grave sites and you have to figure out like what music should we play and like who should talk about what, and like, it can cost upwards of $30,000 for burial services. So she said, like, by the time I actually got home and took care of her affairs and guessed and, like, tried to do right by her, it had been 6 weeks before I sat down with myself and felt grief for the first time. So, okay, so the person who dies without a will, if you're sitting there thinking, like, I don't have one, what if I get hit by a car tomorrow? Think about the people you love. Those two examples just tell you what just the first 2 weeks look like for somebody who has to handle your stuff.
Sure.
Right? And then you have to go to the courthouse and figure out how to file probate for somebody who died without a will. Right? Like that's not, a suggestion. That's a requirement.
That's a requirement. Yeah.
Right. Now, for those of you who maybe have another person on your bank account, like it automatically defaults to the other person. There's obviously some protections, right? If you have title in a house with 2 spouses, one dies, the other one gets it.
Right.
But in a perfect world, not everything's going to be like that. And
Yeah.
maybe you both die. I mean, who knows?
Sure.
Right? We're going to just keep talking about killing people.
So dark today.
I know. But the whole idea is that, you have to go to a courthouse, and the first question they ask you is, well, how much is their assets worth? And you file different documents based on what their assets are worth. So you're 2 weeks past your mom passing away, or like 3 weeks, and they're asking you, well, how much is her stuff worth? Which means you now have to know, well, which bank accounts are only hers versus hers and my dad's? How is the house titled? How is the car titled? Like all these things that you never thought about,
Yeah.
you're now looking at like while you're grieving.
Right.
So, let's say it's worth, you have, it's a small number versus a big number. So you have equity in the house, you have all that stuff. They'll file in the court, and the court will have to assign somebody to handle your stuff because your will didn't say who handles my stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's usually a family member, but
Right.
the county that you live in will also provide somebody if there's nobody close to you. And then there's statutory laws that say, okay, after we pay the debt off, right? Like now the person who maybe didn't want to handle your stuff, maybe it's the daughter that's been quiet for like 15 years because you traumatized her when you were little, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Now she has to do all this stuff, and then she has requirements. Like you have to give debt holders notice. And you
Right.
have to, if you can't find debt holders, you have to put it in the newspaper.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like all these weird requirements.
Yeah.
You get there, and then you have to like do estate sales, which I'm sure people have heard about. You have to like sell the house to cover the debt. You're handling all this stuff, guessing what your family or the person you loved would have wanted. And it's really just a disservice, right? It's a total disservice to the people who love you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's my job to say that, but like it is.
like you're throwing all that on, and I'm thinking like, what if, God forbid,
Yeah.
and I'm like, gee.
Yeah. So, and let me tell you another story because I'm so good at stories. My sister-in-law, my brother's wife, is 43, healthy as can be. I cannot make this up. She, surgeon, very healthy. And last time I met you, she was as healthy as a horse. And she woke up 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks. I don't know. She woke up on a Sunday. It was her 5-year-old's birthday party. And she went up to us. We were all there for his birthday party. She's in New York. And she said, I'm not feeling well. And within 8 hours, she was in the hospital with a very minor small bowel obstruction, which ended up being a surgery.
Yeah.
We don't know what caused it. It's been 3 weeks now. And like, she's home.
Yeah.
But the issue is like this small bowel obstruction caused a bunch of issues. She's now got fluid buildup. Her entire life changed in 24 hours.
Yeah.
In 24 hours, like she may be healthy in like a year from now, but now we're dealing things with like she's got fluid buildup, so she's got to go to a doctor every couple of days to be drained. So she's like, well, I can't do surgery. So now all of a sudden it's like I can't go to work.
Yeah.
And she's got 3 kids. One is 7, one is 6, one is 5. So now my mom is up there taking care of her, and like thankfully she's alive, right? But
Right.
with the small bowel movement, they told us like, when you have something like this and they haven't had surgery before and we don't know where it came from, it's really a discovery surgery going in. And they said like, she could be absolutely fine, which is 80% of the chance, but there's a 20% chance she's not going to make it. And it's not during the surgery, it's the first, 6 weeks after.
Yeah.
So she obviously has all her stuff, but imagine if she didn't. Right? You're not thinking like, okay, I had a small bowel obstruction. Like my chance of death now is 30%. Let me go take care of that. You're not doing that. And 3 weeks ago, she was fine.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I'm calling my brother and I'm like, well, do you want to update anything? Like, should I do it? Like, we don't want her to pass away, but like, her dad has died since she last wrote her stuff. And I'm like, do you want me to review it? Like, do you want me to like take a look at it? So really, when you're doing a 2024, like, plan of your life, you should be reviewing those documents. You
Sure.
should have them.
That's a great point. Like, because there are people that do have their wills, or trust set up, and it's like, well, when was the last time, and what was it done correctly? And
Right.
having that evaluated now,
Right.
you might have done that great, but make sure you're up to speed.
Right. And if you don't have a trust, if you just have a will, just read it over, right? Like the basic requirements in Maryland are so simple. And I'm just going to do the caveat here is please don't use LegalZoom. Please don't use... I know LegalZoom is like, it's $200, it's affordable. Wills are not expensive in the state of Maryland. Most attorneys will not do them. Yes, it's not $200,
Right.
but you're not looking at like, you know, an extensive thing either, because they are pretty easy to produce.
Okay.
When I was in law school, I worked at Transamerica Life Insurance. I swear I've done podcasts. They're going to come after me. They're coming after me for saying the story over and over. But we literally were told to deny claims. Life insurance claims. And what we would do is we would look at estate plans that people pulled on LegalZoom. So let's say, for example, they got a will and a power of attorney and all that stuff off LegalZoom in Louisiana, right? So somewhere along the way, person got sick, their daughter who's POA switched some wishes in the will, switched some wishes in the life insurance. She was doing right by her mom, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But in Louisiana, the word, you know, financial records or life insurance or changing beneficiaries, those all have legal verbiage meanings that might be different from the state of Maryland.
Gotcha.
Not all of them,
Yeah, sure.
but I would look at this stuff and we knew to go through LegalZoom because we could find exceptions to pay life insurance benefits based on law.
Yeah.
So please use a local attorney. That's
Yeah.
just, you don't have to use me, but
Right.
just find somebody. Even like the pro bono centers in Maryland will provide you a free one. And I've looked at them. They're not the best, but they get the job done. Again, they'll get it done. So have a will, have it done locally. Do not use one of these online websites. It's just not a benefit for you.
Yeah. Wow. We've scratched the surface on so much.
Yeah.
Coming up on December the 12th,
Yep.
you are doing a free estate planning workshop.
I am.
In Owings Mills. And, you know, there's plenty of space,
Yep.
right? You have 170.
We have 170 seats open.
Yep. And you've already had like 50 taken up. So
Yeah.
there's still plenty of room.
There is.
And it is free. It's about 2.5 hours.
Yep, and I will provide probably coffee because I'm not that entertaining for 2 hours, but plenty of
I
knowledge.
think you are. I think you are. But then we also thought, you know, so if people wanted to find out more about that workshop, if they wanted to attend that workshop, how could they go about connecting with you?
So, you know, I'm sure you'll tag me in your podcast, but
Absolutely.
if somebody wants to shoot me a text, I always give my cell phone number to all my clients, everybody who's listening. My cell number is 443-739-6724. Literally just text me and be like, I'd like to know more about trust and estates. And I may not respond within, you know, the hour, but I will have either me or my assistant reach out and get you on our schedule to either go to the event, or if you want to book your own event, I will come out and talk as long as you have people interested, because I'm very passionate about helping,
Yeah.
you know, outside of it's just such a vital topic.
Yeah, that event on December 12th is in Owings Mills. What I would love to do is, if there are people that are interested, we can host an event here up in Bel Air.
Yep.
If we do have the people that are interested to do that, so please, you know, either reach out to Diana or reach out to myself, and we can definitely put a date and time together where we can, you know, again, provide this seminar. It's so important.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm with DK Law, which is just my initials, but our website is dklawmd.com.
Okay.
I'm currently redoing the website, but we do plan to put a request a workshop button in there. So by the time this podcast probably comes out, that change should be in there as well. So they could also just go to the website and press, you know, book a workshop, and then we can organize on having it. If you mention that it came from this podcast, you know, we'll both come out or whatever it needs to be.
Yeah, that's huge. That is huge. Wow. Anything further that we didn't like? There's so much to talk about. we could do a ton of more podcasts. Is there one or two things that we didn't talk about that people need to know more about?
Outside of just get your stuff in order.
Get your act together.
Yeah, get it together.
Yeah.
You know, I would just say that there's 5 documents that I don't think I mentioned all of them, but
Yeah.
you should have, at the bare minimum, you should have a will, an advance directive, a power of attorney naming somebody else to make decisions for you. And you can make that effective right away, or you can make it effective if 2 physicians find you incapable to make your own financial decisions. There's also a HIPAA document, which is the reverse of what you get at a doctor's office, right? That says if I can't make decisions for myself and such walks into the hospital, this HIPAA document allows them to talk to my doctors and get information on me.
Okay.
And then, once you have all of that, just figure out your burial plans, right? Like, just ask the bare questions. You don't have to talk to a lawyer for it. Figure out what are the basic instructions for a burial plan. And there's lots of little, online portals that'll help you answer those questions. The second is, if you do have your stuff in order, pull it out. Like right now. No, I'm kidding. Pull it out, because I know most of you probably had a law firm put it in a binder for you, and you put that binder somewhere. And let me tell you, I had a client walk into my office the other day. He's 73. His wife passed away years ago. He has a trust. And I looked at him and I said, well, is your house in your trust name? And he said, no. I said, was your bank account in your trust name? He said, nope. I was like, what did you do when you got this trust? And he said, well, I left it in that binder and I put it in the corner. And I'm like, it's not valid.
Yeah, right, right.
So review your stuff, pull it out, figure out how you're going to keep it safe, switch it to electronic, right? Like, most people now have it in a binder somewhere. It's not even a fireproof safe. Like, make sure your family knows where to access that stuff. Have those conversations and have them now. There's a website that I use. It's called DocuBank. I have no affiliation with them at all, like whatsoever, but they charge like $150 for 5 years of storage of those documents. It ends up being like $30 to $40 a year.
Yeah.
And what they do is they send you a medical emergency card. It has a nice little number on it. Put it in your wallet. You scan all your documents, put it on that website. If somebody finds you, if you get in a car accident, a doctor can access those records.
Yeah.
And then when they put your information in, your family member will get, like, whoever you designate will get an alert or a text message, even if it's 3 a.m, that such and such hospital access the records. So it's just a nicer protection, because for those of you who do have your stuff in order, it's probably in the corner somewhere. You haven't looked at it in years. Know what it says, store it better.
If people want to reach out to you and they mention the TMA Connection podcast, can they get a free consultation with you?
Absolutely.
I put you on the spot there.
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
So I will do a 30-minute consult. I do it on Zoom. I do it in person. I make myself available. I do book out about 2 weeks out. But, if you shoot me a text, again, 443-739-6724, bring all your stuff to me. I will look at it. I will tell you what you need to fix. Even if I never see you again, I'll be happy to help you.
That's awesome. Wow. I have to take action on this podcast. Sarah, remind me that I have to take action on what I need to do to protect our family. This has been awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, folks. Again, I asked in the beginning, and I'm going to ask right now, if you found value in this, please share this out. Copy some, send it to somebody. We'll have it on YouTube. We'll have it on Facebook. We'll have it on Instagram. We'll have it all over the place. You will be able to find it, of course, on Apple and Spotify and all those other podcast platforms. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Markland Advantage, the DK Law Group, Diana Kahn. Super amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Folks, until next time, especially...